If you're watching this, it means you've recently acquired a time machine and are planning a visit to Berlin, Germany in the 1940s, specifically during the Second World War. This is perhaps one of the most historically significant and morally complex periods you could choose to visit. You'll be witnessing a city and a society in the grip of totalitarian rule, at war with much of the world, and complicit in some of history's greatest crimes. This won't be easy, and it requires serious preparation. I'm going to focus primarily on the period from 1940 to early 1943, after the conquest of France, but before the really devastating bombing campaigns transformed Berlin into ruins. By late 1943 and into 1944 to 45, Berlin becomes increasingly dangerous and chaotic, so I'd recommend avoiding those later years unless you have very specific reasons for going. Now let's talk about what you need to know. First, and most critically, personal safety. You're entering a police state at war, and the dangers here are unlike almost any other period you might visit. The Nazi regime maintained control through an extensive network of informers, secret police, and a population conditioned to report suspicious behaviour. The Gestapo, the secret state police, had essentially unlimited power to arrest, interrogate, and imprison anyone they deemed suspicious or dangerous to the state. There was no due process, no protection under law. If you attracted their attention, you could simply disappear into the concentration camp system. Travel in a group if possible, as you'll be less conspicuous and can support each other's backstories. However, I need to be clear, even travelling in a group won't protect you from the regime's machinery if you make serious mistakes. The key is to blend in completely, follow all rules to the letter, and never ever express any political opinions that could be construed as critical of the Nazi regime. Street crime in the conventional sense, muggings, pickpocketing, random violence, was actually relatively low compared to peacetime or compared to some other historical periods. The Nazi regime was obsessed with order and control, and they enforced it ruthlessly. However, this safety came at an enormous cost. The violence was state-sanctioned and directed at specific groups. You'll witness arrests, you'll see people in forced labour, you'll encounter checkpoints and document inspections. The violence is there, it's just organised and systematic rather than random. Keep your papers on you at all times. This cannot be stressed enough. You'll need identification documents, ration cards, and potentially work permits or travel permits depending on your backstory. Getting caught without proper papers could get you arrested immediately. Never leave your accommodation without your full set of documents. Another danger, the bombing. While the period I'm recommending, 1940, early 1943, saw relatively light bombing compared to what came, later Royal Air Force raids did occur, and they became more frequent as the war progressed. Air raid sirens were a regular part of life. When you hear them, get to a shelter immediately. Berliners took the raids seriously, and so should you. The public bunkers and subway stations served as shelters. Don't try to stay above ground to see what it's like. High explosive and incendiary bombs killed indiscriminately. Now let's address something that makes this period particularly difficult. You will be surrounded by ideology and by crimes against humanity happening in real time. Jewish Berliners were being systematically deported to death camps. The deportations accelerated in 1941-1942. You'll see people wearing yellow stars, you'll witness arrests. You'll see businesses marked as Aryanized. Forced labourers, prisoners of war, concentration camp inmates, and civilians from occupied countries worked in Berlin's factories. You'll see them in their striped uniforms or marked clothing, underfed and brutalised. You cannot intervene. This is perhaps the hardest thing to accept about visiting this period. If you attempt to help someone being arrested, if you protest a deportation, if you so much as show visible sympathy, you will be arrested yourself and likely sent to a camp. You cannot save anyone, and attempting to do so will only add yourself to the list of victims. Your presence there is as an observer only. If you cannot emotionally handle witnessing atrocities without intervening, do not make this trip. Next, let's talk about health and disease. By this point in history, Germany had modern medicine and public health infrastructure, which is good news for you. Vaccination against smallpox was standard. Typhus, however, was a concern, particularly in the crowded conditions of the later war years, and in areas where forced labourers and prisoners were housed. Get your typhus vaccination before you go. The food situation deteriorates as the war progresses. In 1940, Rationing was strict, but most Germans weren't starving yet. By 1942-43, the rations were becoming inadequate, and by 1944-45, actual starvation became an issue. For your visit in the 1940-early 1943 window, you won't be starving, but you will be eating a limited and monotonous diet unless you have access to the black market. Tuberculosis was still a real concern in this era, particularly in crowded urban environments. The Nazi regime's own policies created conditions for disease: overcrowded housing for forced labourers, inadequate food for targeted populations, unsanitary conditions in transit camps. If you'll be in areas where prisoners or forced labourers are housed, be aware of the increased disease risk. Dental and medical care was available, though increasingly strained by the war. Many doctors had been drafted into military service. If you need medical care and have proper papers identifying you as a German civilian or an Ally citizen, you can access it, but avoid needing it if possible. Let's discuss money and how the economy works. Germany used the Reichsmark as currency, abbreviated RM. By 1940, Germany had been on a war economy for years, and normal market forces didn't really apply anymore. Almost everything was rationed: food, clothing, fuel, soap, tobacco. The Reichsmark alone wasn't enough to get you what you needed. You also needed ration cards. The official exchange rate had the Reichsmark at about 2.5 RM to $1, but this was an artificial rate maintained by the Nazi government. The real purchasing power was hard to assess because so little could be purchased without ration coupons. You'll need to acquire both Reichsmarks and the appropriate ration cards for your cover identity. Here's how rationing worked. Every civilian received ration cards based on their age, occupation, and sometimes their race. The cards were divided into sections for different categories: meat, bread, fats, eggs, milk, clothing, soap, and so on. Each week or month, certain sections could be redeemed for specific quantities of goods. Heavy labourers received higher rations than office workers. Aryans received more than Jews, who by 1941-42 received barely subsistence-level rations. Prices were controlled by the state. A loaf of bread might cost 32 pfennigs, 100 pfennigs, one Reichsmark, with the appropriate ration coupon. Without the coupon, you couldn't buy it legally at any price. Butter was one of the most scarce items. The ration might be 125 grams per week per person. Meat rations varied, but might be 400 and 500 grams per week. This wasn't starvation, but it was tight, and many foods people were used to, tropical fruits, coffee, chocolate, were simply unavailable or astronomically expensive on the black market. The black market existed and thrived, though trading on it was illegal and could result in severe punishment. Farmers sometimes sold food under the table. Workers in factories with access to materials might trade them. People with connections could get extra rations. Cigarettes became a form of currency. If you want to buy extra food or goods, you'll need to find black market contacts, but be extremely careful. Gestapo agents ran stings, and informers were everywhere. For reference on costs, a skilled worker might earn 200-300 RM per month. Rent for a modest apartment might be 30-60 RM monthly. A meal at a simple restaurant might cost 1-2 RM. But again, the restaurant would need to collect ration coupons as well. A movie ticket cost about 1 RM. What you'll find is that money was less important than connections and ration allocations. Now let's talk about where you'll sleep. Your options depend entirely on your cover identity and documents. If you're presenting as a German civilian or a civilian from an Allied or neutral country, you have several options. Hotels existed and functioned throughout the war, though many had been converted to other uses or were reserved for military, personnel or party officials. The major hotels like the Adlon or Kaiserhof remained open, but were expensive and frequented by Nazi officials, not ideal for someone trying to stay inconspicuous. Mid-range hotels and guest houses, pensionen, are your better option. You'll need to register with the police when you check in. This was standard practice. Your papers will be examined and recorded. Many Berliners rented rooms in their apartments to supplement their income. This was common and actually a good option for you. It's less formal than a hotel, but the landlord will still need to see your papers and might ask questions about your background. Having a private room gives you more freedom and attracts less attention than constantly being in hotels where staff and other guests might notice you. There were also arrangements through various Nazi organisations, the Labour Front party offices, that provided accommodation for workers. Unless your cover specifically requires this, avoid it. The scrutiny would be intense. If you're presenting as a foreign worker, which is not recommended unless you speak the relevant language perfectly, you'd be assigned to barracks or crowded dormitories, often with poor conditions. Don't choose this route. The reality is that housing in Berlin was increasingly crowded as the war went on. Bombing created housing shortages. Foreign workers, evacuees from more heavily bombed cities, all competed for space. Still, in the 1940 early 1943 period, it's possible to find accommodation without too much difficulty if you have money and papers. One thing you need to understand about accommodation: air raid shelters. Your building will have designated shelter space, either in the basement or access to a public bunker nearby. Learn where it is immediately upon arrival. When the sirens sound, and they will, you need to go there. Wardens would check that people were following air raid procedures, and refusing to shelter could attract unwanted attention. Where will you eat? Despite rationing, there were options. Restaurants and cafes remained open, though their menus were limited and they had to operate within the rationing system. When you ordered food, you'd need to hand over the appropriate ration coupons along with payment. The quality of restaurant food declined as the war progressed, with ersatz substitutes becoming more common: chicory coffee instead of real coffee, margarine instead of butter, mysterious meat dishes where you didn't want to ask too many questions about the sauce. There were different classes of restaurants. Simple workers' canteens, Kantinen, served cheap basic meals: soup, potatoes, bread, maybe a small piece of meat. These were subsidized and required ration coupons, but were affordable. A step up were regular restaurants, which ranged from modest establishments to more upscale places. The upscale restaurants could still provide decent meals, at least in the early war years, though at high prices and with ration coupons required. Factory workers often ate in factory canteens, which provided a hot midday meal as part of the war effort to keep production going. Heavy industrial workers received supplementary rations. Beer halls and pubs, Gaststätten, remained popular social spaces. Beer was rationed but available, and these places served food as well. They were where ordinary Berliners gathered, talked, complained, carefully, and tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. Street food had declined from peacetime. There were still some vendors selling pretzels or simple snacks, but the abundance of the past was gone. For buying raw ingredients, the system was bureaucratic and time-consuming. Each type of shop, butcher, baker, grocer, accepted only the specific ration coupons for their goods. You'd stand in line at the baker to redeem your bread coupons, then line up at the butcher for your meat ration, then the grocer for your fat and grain rations. This was a daily or near-daily chore for most households, and the lines could be long, especially if word got out that a shop had received a delivery of a scarce item. Weekly markets still operated, but were shadows of their former selves, with most goods requiring ration coupons. Farmers who came to the city markets were supposed to sell only through official channels, but quiet exchanges happened. A bit of butter or some eggs under the table for extra cash. Be very careful if you engage in this. You could be arrested, and so could the farmer. One interesting note: restaurants frequented by party officials or the military elite often seem to have access to better food than the ration system should have allowed. If you observe this, and you will, don't comment on it. The system was deeply corrupt, with the powerful taking care of themselves while ordinary citizens scrounged for basics. Now let's discuss the language barrier, and this is actually one area where you might have an advantage. German is a language with extensive learning materials, and if you can become fluent or near fluent in German before you go, you'll be able to communicate effectively. However, Berlin had a distinct dialect and accent, Berlinerisch, which was quite different from standard High German. Berliners spoke quickly, with different vocabulary and pronunciation. If you speak textbook German, people will notice you're not a native Berliner, but that's actually fine. You can say you're from another part of Germany or from Austria or the Sudetenland. The advantage of wartime Berlin is that it was full of people from other places. The war had shuffled populations around massively. Evacuees from bombed cities, workers transferred to Berlin's industries, people from annexed territories, ethnic Germans resettled from Eastern Europe, foreign workers from occupied countries. Someone speaking German with an accent or dialect from elsewhere wasn't particularly unusual. If you don't speak German, this becomes very problematic. You could potentially present as a civilian from an allied country: Italian, Spanish, Hungarian, Romanian, but you'd need to speak that language fluently and have documentation to back up your cover. You could present as a forced labourer from France or Belgium or the Netherlands, but that means accepting the treatment forced labourers received, which was often brutal, and living in barracks under guard. I don't recommend this approach. You cannot present as being from enemy nations, Britain, America, the Soviet Union, without massive risk. Enemy nationals who were still in Germany by 1940 were in internment camps. If your accent or language marked you as a native English speaker, you could be accused of being a spy, which meant torture and execution. The safest approach is to learn German thoroughly before you go. Explain any accent as being from a different region of Germany or from an area with German-speaking populations. Have your story ready about where you're from and why you're in Berlin. Something to understand about conversations in 1940s Berlin. People were extremely careful about what they said in public. The regime had normalized surveillance and denunciation. The phrase people used was "Walls have ears, die Wände haben Ohren." You never knew who might be an informer, your neighbour, your co-worker, the person sitting next to you in a cafe. Casual criticism of the regime, defeatist talk about the war, jokes about Hitler, all of these could get you arrested. There was a crime specifically called undermining military morale, Wehrkraftzersetzung, that carried severe penalties including death. Simply saying something like, "I don't think we can win this war," within earshot of the wrong person, could result in arrest and trial before a special court. So when you engage in conversations with Berliners, understand that they will be guarded. They might express cautious complaints about rationing or the air raids, but they won't openly criticize the regime unless they trust you completely, and they won't trust you. You should be equally guarded. Express no political opinions. If someone tries to draw you into dangerous talk, deflect immediately. At the same time, don't be so wooden and careful that you seem suspicious. Learn the normal casual greetings and small talk. People did still gossip, talk about the weather, complain about food shortages in vague terms, discuss movies and sports. Life went on even in a police state, and people found ways to be human despite everything. Now let's talk about social class and how the Nazi system worked in practice. Pre-Nazi Germany had a fairly traditional class structure: aristocracy, upper bourgeoisie, middle class, working class. The Nazis claimed to have transcended class with their people's community, Volksgemeinschaft. But in reality, hierarchies remained and new ones were created based on party membership and racial ideology. At the top were the party elite: Goebbels as Gauleiter of Berlin, various SS and military commanders, government ministers. These people had access to luxury goods, fine food, cars, the best housing. They were untouchable. Below them were the broader party membership and those with positions in the Nazi state apparatus: mid-level officials, Gestapo agents, SS men, military officers. These people had privileges, better rations, access to party stores, the ability to cut through bureaucracy. Then you had ordinary Aryan Germans who weren't party members or were only nominal members. They were expected to be loyal and participate in Nazi organisations and activities, but many just tried to keep their heads down and survive. This was probably the majority of the population. Your cover identity should place you in this category: someone who goes along with the system without being a zealot. Working class Berliners, factory workers, transport workers, service workers, were actually somewhat valued by the regime because their labour was essential to the war effort. They received special allocations and their needs were considered important. Still, they lived difficult lives under hard conditions. Now, a critical warning about race. If you are Jewish or Romani, do not go. Period. This is a death sentence. The regime is actively murdering every Jewish and Romani person they can find, and you will be deported to a death camp. If you are black, visibly indigenous, or obviously non-European in appearance, I strongly advise against going. You'll face constant violence, harassment, and potential arrest or worse, with no legal protection whatsoever. The Nazis classified non-white people as racially inferior, and while they weren't systematically exterminating all non-white groups the way they were Jews and Roma, you'd be in serious danger every moment. If you're Asian and can credibly pass as Japanese with language skills, you might survive due to the bizarre honorary Aryan exception for Japan as Germany's ally. But if your cover is blown, you're done. For everyone else who isn't white, this is a white supremacist genocidal state, and your safety cannot be guaranteed. Ask yourself if historical curiosity is worth risking your life, because for most of you, it isn't. Stay home. Foreign workers existed in a separate hierarchy. Western Europeans, French, Belgian, Dutch, were treated better than Eastern Europeans. Poles, Ukrainians, Russians. The further east you came from and the more racially inferior the Nazis considered you, the worse your treatment. Soviet prisoners of war were treated with spectacular cruelty. For you as a visitor, your cover story needs to place you in the acceptable category, an Aryan German or citizen of an allied nation, ideally with some reason to be in Berlin that doesn't involve military service, which would raise questions about why you're not at the front. You need to show deference to anyone in uniform or with party insignia, but you don't need to grovel unless they're clearly very high-ranking. With ordinary Berliners, normal polite behaviour is appropriate. One thing that might surprise you, despite all the propaganda about unity and enthusiasm, by 1940-41, many ordinary Berliners were weary, worried about relatives at the front and frustrated by shortages. The regime demanded displays of enthusiasm, Hitler salutes, attendance at rallies, donations to war drives. But behind closed doors, many people were just trying to survive. You'll notice a disconnect between the public performance of Nazi ideology and private exhaustion. Let's talk about clothing and appearance, which is critical for blending in. German fashion in the 1940s was conservative and increasingly austere due to wartime restrictions. For men, the standard was suits or workwear depending on class. A typical middle-class or working-class man wore trousers, a shirt, perhaps a vest or sweater, and a jacket or overcoat. Suits were dark, charcoal, navy, brown. Hats were nearly universal. Fedoras for middle-class men, flat caps for workers. In summer, men might go without a jacket, but appearing in public without proper attire was frowned upon. Men's hair was short, neat, parted on the side. Facial hair was uncommon except for older men who might have moustaches. The Hitler moustache style was actually not particularly common among ordinary Germans. That was his distinctive look. Clean-shaven was most typical for younger men. For women, the silhouette was practical and modest. Skirts fell to mid-calf or below the knee. Dresses were common, often in simple patterns or solid colours. Blouses and skirts were standard for work or daily wear. Slacks on women were unusual and would attract attention. Pants were for heavy labour or countryside work, not city streetwear. Women's hair was typically styled with waves or rolls. The Victory roll style was popular in this era. Longer hair was pulled back neatly. Headscarves were common, especially for working women or when going out in bad weather. Makeup was worn, but more subdued than in the 1930s. Lipstick was still popular, but products were increasingly scarce. Jewellery was simple, a wedding band, maybe a brooch or simple necklace. Anything too flashy would seem out of place given the sacrifice for the war effort propaganda. Colours were muted. You won't see a lot of bright colours in wartime Berlin. Greys, browns, dark blues, black, olive green. Fabric was rationed, so clothing showed wear. People mended and patched their clothes. You'll see elbow patches on jackets, darned socks, turned collars on shirts. New clothing was rare and expensive, even with ration cards. Shoes were sturdy and practical, leather if you could get it, but leather was scarce and went to the military. Wooden-soled shoes became common. Rubber was desperately scarce. Shoes showed wear, scuffed, resoled multiple times, heels worn down. Children wore simplified versions of adult clothing. Hitler Youth and League of German Girls uniforms were common for young people. Brown shirts, shorts for boys, white blouses and dark skirts for girls, with neckerchiefs and insignia. Uniforms were everywhere. Wehrmacht, military, SS, SA, Hitler Youth, various party formations, police, civil defence. As a civilian, you do not wear anything that could be confused with a uniform. Wearing military insignia or medals you didn't earn was a serious crime. One detail, clothing for Jews, if you see any still in the city in this period, included the mandatory yellow star, which had to be worn on the outer garment, clearly visible. By 1942-43, most of Berlin's Jews had been deported, but in 1940-41, you might still see people wearing the star. Do not stare, do not comment, do not approach them. The Nazis watched for anyone showing sympathy. Let's discuss daily time and rhythm. Germany operated on Central European time. In wartime, clocks were set to summertime year-round to maximise daylight hours for production and to reduce lighting needs. The working day started early. Factories often began shifts at 6 or 7 a.m. Shops opened around 8 or 9 a.m. The rhythm of the day was structured around work and around rationing. Housewives planned their days around standing in queues to get their rations. Workers had brief lunch breaks, often eating in factory canteens. Sundays were still somewhat respected as rest days, though war production often meant Sunday shifts. Church attendance had declined under the Nazis, but churches still held services, and some people still went, though active Christianity was viewed with suspicion by hardline Nazis. Evenings were when people returned home, listened to the radio, state-controlled broadcasts, perhaps went to a pub or cafe if they could afford it. Entertainment options existed but were limited. Cinemas showed German films and newsreels, all propaganda to some degree. Theatres and concert halls still operated. Sports events continued on a reduced scale. The blackout was strictly enforced. As soon as darkness fell, all windows had to be covered so no light escaped that might help enemy bombers. Air raid wardens patrolled and would rap on your door angrily if any light was visible. Street lights were extinguished or heavily dimmed. Moving around Berlin at night meant navigating mostly dark streets, with only occasional dim blue lights marking important intersections or hazards. People carried small pocket torches with the light dimmed. Car headlights had hoods that directed light downward only. The air raid sirens became part of the rhythm. When they sounded, everything stopped. People went to shelters and waited. Sometimes it was a false alarm or the raid targeted another part of the city. Other times you'd hear the anti-aircraft guns hammering away, the whistle and crump of bombs. After the all-clear sounded, people emerged and went back to their lives, though some neighbourhoods might be burning or rubble-choked. Now let's talk about religion, and how it operated in Nazi Germany. Germany was historically divided between Protestant, mostly Lutheran, and Catholic populations, with Protestants dominant in Berlin. The Nazi regime had complex and hostile relationships with both churches. Hitler himself was nominally Catholic, but had no real religious belief. The party ideology was fundamentally anti-Christian, though they were often vague about this because openly attacking Christianity would alienate too many Germans. Instead, they tried to co-opt and control the churches. The German Christians movement tried to merge Christianity with Nazi racial ideology, removing Jewish elements from Christianity and creating a nationalist religion. Most serious Christians rejected this. The confessing church was the Protestant opposition movement, which resisted Nazi control of church affairs, though many of its members were arrested. Martin Niemöller, a prominent confessing church pastor, was in a concentration camp by this time for his opposition. The Catholic Church had signed a concordat with Hitler in 1933, agreeing not to interfere in politics in exchange for protection of Catholic institutions. This protection was regularly violated. Catholic clergy who spoke against the regime were arrested. By 1940, the relationship was tense and hostile beneath a surface of formal correctness. For you as a visitor, attending church services is possible and wouldn't necessarily attract suspicion. Many Germans still went to church. However, being too overtly religious might be noted. The safest approach is to avoid the subject unless asked, and if asked, give vague answers about being a nominal Protestant or Catholic who doesn't attend regularly. Jews had been systematically excluded from public life. Synagogues had been burned during Kristallnacht in November 1938. The few that remained standing had been seized or closed. Jewish religious life, if it continued at all, was in hiding and terror. You will not see Jewish religious services happening openly. What about other groups? Jehovah's Witnesses were brutally persecuted for refusing military service and refusing to give the Hitler salute. They were sent to concentration camps in large numbers. Freemasons were banned. The Nazis considered them part of a Jewish Masonic conspiracy. Occultism was officially discouraged, though some Nazi leaders like Himmler had strange mystical interests. The regime tried to create its own quasi-religious ceremonies, party rallies with choreographed spectacle, solstice celebrations, special Nazi naming ceremonies for babies instead of christenings. These were meant to replace traditional religion, but most ordinary Germans found them artificial. Let's discuss gender dynamics and the role of women. Nazi ideology had a clear view of women. They were to be mothers and homemakers, producing Aryan children for the Reich. The slogan was Kinder Küche Kirche, children kitchen church. Women were pushed out of professional careers in the 1930s. However, the war changed this dramatically. With millions of men at the front, women were pulled into the workforce out of necessity. By 1940-41, women worked in factories, in offices, in transport, in civil defence. They operated anti-aircraft guns in later years. The ideology said women should be home, but reality meant they were keeping the economy running. Women still had no real political power. They couldn't hold party leadership positions. The ideal Nazi woman was submissive, devoted to husband and children, physically fit for childbearing. The regime gave medals to women who had many children. The Mother's Cross in bronze for 4 to 5 children, silver for 6 to 7, gold for 8 or more. Abortion and contraception were tightly controlled, illegal for Aryan Germans, the Nazis wanted more births, but forced on undesirable populations. Unmarried pregnancy was actually encouraged for racially valuable women, with special facilities for unwed mothers run by the SS. This was part of the Lebensborn program, meant to increase the Aryan birth rate. As a woman visiting Berlin in this era, you'll face certain expectations. You should dress modestly. You should be deferential to men in authority. However, being a working woman is entirely normal given the war situation, so having a job won't seem strange. Being an independent woman travelling alone might raise some eyebrows, but wouldn't be impossible to explain. You could say you're travelling to or from family or relocating for war work. If you're a man visiting, you'll need to explain why you're not in military service. Germany had total military mobilization. Men of military age were expected to be serving unless they had a medical exemption or were in essential war work. Your backstory needs to account for this clearly. Now let's talk about creating your backstory, which is perhaps the most critical preparation you'll do. Your cover story needs to be airtight because the consequences of being caught in lies are severe. Let's think through your options. First, where are you from? You cannot say you're from Berlin unless you can perfectly mimic the Berlin accent and know the city's geography intimately from that era. Even then, it's risky. Someone might ask about specific streets or neighbourhoods destroyed in bombing that you wouldn't know about. Better options. You're from another German city. Say you're from Hamburg, Cologne, Dresden, Munich. Cities that existed but that most Berliners wouldn't know intimately. This explains why you don't know Berlin well. You could also say you're from a smaller town or rural area. The key is choosing somewhere real but not somewhere you're likely to run into someone who actually lives there. Or say you're from an annexed territory. Austria, the Sudetenland, areas of Poland that were incorporated into the Reich. These areas had been absorbed and their German-speaking populations were considered citizens. This explains any slight accent differences and also any gaps in your knowledge of Nazi Germany's history, since you weren't here for some of it. Why are you in Berlin? You need a plausible reason. Options. You're in Berlin for war work. You've been assigned to work in a factory, in an office, in logistics. Millions of people were moved around for war production, so this is very believable. The authorities would have papers showing your work assignment. You're visiting family. Maybe you have relatives in Berlin, and you're staying with them, or checking on them after an air raid. This explains why you're not in the military. You're here temporarily and will return to your home city and your job there. However, you'd need travel permits for this. You're recovering from an injury that left you unfit for military service. This works if you're a man of military age. You might have served and been wounded, or you might have had an accident in war work. You'll need medical papers to back this up. Be vague about details. Military medical records were complex and you don't want to get caught in inconsistencies. You're a skilled worker in a reserved occupation, someone whose skills are needed on the home front. Certain engineers, technicians, specialists in crucial industries were kept out of military service. This requires detailed knowledge of your supposed trade, so only use this if you've done extensive research. If you're a woman, you're a secretary, office worker, or employed in light industry. You could say you've been brought to Berlin to work in the growing bureaucracy of the war effort, or you're working in a hospital or in civil defence. Women did all of these jobs. What's your political background? Here's where you need to be very careful. You cannot present as anti-Nazi, that's suicidal. You also shouldn't present as a fanatical Nazi, because that might put you in situations where you'd be expected to know things you don't know or do things you don't want to do. The safest cover. You're an ordinary German who accepts the regime as normal, who doesn't ask questions, who does what you're told. You're not particularly political. You're focused on your work and getting through the war. This was actually the attitude of many Germans, and it won't attract suspicion. If someone asks if you're a party member, you can say no. Not everyone was, though it could help your career. If pressed, you could say you're considering joining, or you belong to one of the mass organisations like the Labour Front, which was basically compulsory for workers. Never express any of the following: doubts about victory, criticism of Hitler or the leadership, sympathy for Jews or other persecuted groups, defeatism about the war, skepticism about propaganda. These are all dangerous. What you can express: frustration with rationing, carefully, tiredness from long work hours, worry about relatives at the front, annoyance at bureaucracy, hope that the war will end soon, framed as a hope for German victory, of course. These are the complaints you'll hear from ordinary Berliners, and echoing them in moderate terms helps you blend in. Now, arrival and logistics. This is tricky because you need to arrive without being seen appearing out of nowhere, and you need to immediately have proper papers. Do not arrive in the city centre. Do not arrive in any location where people would see you materialise. Berlin in 1940-43 still had green spaces on its outskirts, the Grunewald forest to the west, parks and fields in the outer districts. Arrive in one of these less populated areas, away from roads and paths, early in the morning before most people are moving around, or late at night under cover of darkness. The Grunewald is a good option. It's a large forested area, several square kilometres, where you could appear without witnesses. Other options include the Tiergarten, the large park in central Berlin, though riskier because it's more frequented, or fields and woods in outer districts like Spandau or Köpenick. Timing: arrive in the very early morning, around 5 a.m. in summer, 6 a.m. in winter. This is past the time when police patrols might be checking for curfew violators, but before most people are up and moving. The city would be at its quietest, or arrive around 10 p.m, after dark but not suspiciously late, though this means navigating the blackout to get to your accommodation. Hide your time device immediately, bury it or conceal it in a location you can find again. Mark the location carefully in your memory. Use landmarks, natural features. You will need to return to this exact spot when you leave. In a forest, you might bury it at the base of a distinctive tree or rock. Mark the tree somehow in a way that won't attract attention, a small scratch, a pebble arrangement. The device must not be found by anyone, or it could be confiscated as suspicious technology. Once you've secured the device, you need to make your way into the city. You should be dressed appropriately by this point, not modern clothes. You should look like a German civilian of the period. Make your way to roads or paths, join other people heading into the city for work and blend in with the morning flow. You need papers immediately. This is the hardest part of the logistics. In the real world, you'd need forged documents or documents obtained through time travel prep that we can't explain here. But understand, without an identity card, ration cards, and possibly work papers or travel permits, you cannot function. You will be checked. Police and officials routinely demanded to see papers, especially from people they didn't recognize. At checkpoints, in raids, during investigations, papers were required. Without them, you'd be arrested, as a vagrant or worse, suspected as a spy or saboteur. The identity card, Kencard, had your photo, name, date and place of birth, current address and an official stamp. Ration cards had your name and were tied to your identity card. Work papers showed your employment. Travel permits were needed for long-distance travel. All of these needed to look authentic and have the right stamps and signatures for the period and location. When you've made it into the city and found your accommodation, register with the landlord and the local police as required. Your landlord will make a note of your identity documents. This was standard procedure and can't be avoided. The police registration was usually handled by the landlord reporting new tenants to local authorities, though you might need to visit the local police station in person to complete registration. Learn the layout of Berlin. Get a mental map of the major districts. Mitte, the centre, Charlottenburg to the west, Kreuzberg to the south, Prenzlauer Berg to the northeast. Learn the U-Bahn and S-Bahn lines. Berlin had an extensive subway and suburban rail system that continued operating during the war, though with reduced service. Know where the major landmarks are: the Reichstag, the Brandenburg Gate, Unter den Linden, Potsdamer Platz, the Tiergarten, Alexanderplatz. Know where you're staying and how to get back there. If you get lost, don't ask police for directions unless absolutely necessary. You don't want official attention. Ask ordinary civilians instead, but do it in a way that doesn't seem too suspicious. Maybe say you're new to Berlin, just arrived for war work. Now that you know what you need to know, it's time to turn on the machine and head back. Are you ready? You're sitting in your room, comfortable and safe in the 21st century. Around you, everything is normal. Your laptop glowing on the desk, the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the soft buzz of electric lights, the distant sound of traffic. Your phone sits nearby, connected to the entire world. You can look up anything you want, say anything you want, go anywhere you want. You are free in ways the people you're about to visit cannot even imagine. You hold the device in your hands. It's cold, heavier than it looks. This small object is going to take you back more than 80 years, into a world at war, into a society that has committed itself to evil, into one of the darkest chapters of human history. You think about what you've prepared for, the papers you'll need to show, the backstory you've memorized, the German phrases you've practiced. You think about the fear you'll need to hide, the horrors you'll witness, the helplessness you'll feel. You think about the ordinary people living their lives in that city, most of them complicit in terrible crimes, even if they're not pulling triggers or operating gas chambers themselves. You think about the few who resisted, who helped, who refused, and how. Many of them paid with their lives. Are you really ready for this? You take a breath. You activate the device. The familiar room around you begins to shift, the walls seeming to bend, the light changing quality. There's a sensation of movement, of falling without falling, of time and space becoming uncertain. The solid world of your present dissolves like smoke. Colours blur, sounds distort and fade. You feel yourself pulled backward, down through the decades, through the years of your lifetime, through your parents' lives, your grandparents' lives, back past the end of the war, past the liberation of the camps, past the collapse of the Third Reich, back into its terrible height of power. And then the sensation stops. Solidity returns. The pull ceases. Reality settles into focus again, but it's not your reality anymore. You wake up on cold ground, your face pressed against earth and decaying leaves. For a moment you're confused, disoriented, the way you are when you wake in an unfamiliar place and can't remember why you're there. Then memory floods back, and with it, a spike of adrenaline. You're not home. You're not in your time. You're in the Grunewald forest on the western edge of Berlin, in the year 1940 or 41 or 42. The exact year doesn't matter as much as what year it is not. It is not your year. It is not your world. You open your eyes. The light is grey, pre-dawn, that colourless quality of early morning when the sun hasn't yet broken the horizon. Trees surround you, oaks and pines, their branches dark against the slowly lightening sky. The forest floor is thick with fallen leaves, and you can smell them, that rich scent of decomposition, of earth and wood and the faint musk of growing things. It's colder than you expected. Your breath makes small clouds. You sit up slowly, carefully, listening. Silence mostly. Not the complete silence of deep wilderness. This forest is surrounded by a city of 4 million people, but a relative quiet. Somewhere in the distance you hear a bird calling, a sound you don't recognize, some European species. The wind moves through the branches above you, making them creak and whisper. No human sounds yet. No voices, no engines, no footsteps. You check your clothing. Everything is in place. The worn wool coat, the sturdy leather shoes that pinch slightly, the clothes that mark you as an ordinary German civilian of modest means. In your pockets, the papers that are your only protection. The identity card, the ration booklet, the work permit. You feel the weight of the coins in your pocket, Reichsmarks that will buy you almost nothing without the proper coupons. The time device is still in your other hand. You need to hide it immediately, before anyone could possibly see you with it. You stand, brush leaves and dirt from your coat, and look around for a hiding place. There, a large oak tree with an exposed root system, creating a hollow at its base. You kneel, dig quickly into the soft earth beneath the roots, creating a hole deep enough. You wrap the device in the cloth you brought for this purpose. It looks like an old handkerchief, nothing that would seem strange if found, and bury it, packing the earth back over it, covering the spot with leaves and twigs until it looks undisturbed. You memorize the tree, the way its trunk splits about 2 meters up, the pattern of the bark, the angle of the large lower branch. You look around for nearby landmarks, a cluster of 3 birch trees about 10 meters to the east, a large moss-covered boulder to the west. You fix the location in your memory. You will need to find this exact spot again. Now, you need to wait for the right time to approach the city. Too early and you'll seem suspicious, someone wandering in the pre-dawn darkness. You need to time your arrival to blend with morning workers heading into the city. You check the sky. The grey is slowly warming, taking on the faintest hint of colour. Dawn is perhaps 20 minutes away. You decide to wait here, hidden in the trees, until you hear or see signs of people on the nearby roads. The silence of this early morning is profound in a way you're not used to. There's no underlying hum of electricity, no distant highway sound, no airplane noise, no electronic buzzing. The city is sleeping, mostly without power, certainly without the constant background noise of a modern city. This silence is deeper, older, the silence that humanity lived with for most of its history. As you wait, the sky lightens. You can see more of the forest now, the details emerging from the greyness. The bark of the trees, rough and dark, the carpet of leaves, brown and copper and rust-coloured, a spiderweb stretched between 2 branches beaded with dew, catching the growing light. The air smells clean in a way that surprises you. Yes, there's the vegetable smell of the forest, but there's something else, or rather, something missing. The air doesn't have the chemical tang of modern pollution, the smell of exhaust and industrial output. What you're smelling is smoke, wood smoke, coal smoke, but it's different from modern emissions. Cleaner in some ways, though it still makes the air hazy. Then you hear it. Voices, distant but real, and the sound of footsteps on a road. You move carefully through the trees, staying out of sight, until you can see the road that runs along the edge of the Grunewald. A group of workers is heading toward the city, men in work clothes and caps, women in coats and headscarves, walking with the purposeful stride of people heading to early morning shifts. They talk quietly among themselves, their breath steaming in the cold air. You wait for another group to pass, and then another. You time it carefully, and then you step out of the trees onto the road as if you'd been walking there all along, joining the flow of people heading east toward Berlin proper. No one looks at you strangely. You're just another person, heading to work, another face in the morning crowd. You fall into step with the others, keeping your eyes down, saying nothing, just walking. The road is paved but not smooth. There are patches and repairs, places where the surface has been damaged and inexpertly fixed. To either side, the forest is gradually giving way to buildings, the outer suburbs of the city. The buildings here are modest, working-class apartment blocks, small houses, allotment gardens where people grow vegetables. Everything looks shabby, maintained but not cared for, the paint fading, the walls stained by weather and smoke. As you walk with the morning workers, you start to notice things. The woman ahead of you has a mended patch on the back of her coat, sewn carefully but visibly. The man to your left has shoes that are cracked and worn, the sole of one shoe flapping slightly as he walks. These people are not starving. Germany in 1940 or early 41 is not yet at that point, but they're clearly making do, wearing things long past their prime, stretching everything to the limit. More people join the flow as you get closer to the city centre. You're on a main road now, and trolley cars rattle past, packed with passengers. The trolleys are painted in drab colours, and they're crowded, people pressed against the windows. You consider taking one, but decide to walk. You want to see the city as you approach, want to take in the details at ground level. The buildings grow taller, denser. You're entering Berlin proper now, and the architecture changes. These are the apartment blocks of the city, 5 and 6 stories tall, built in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Solid brick and stone construction with ornate facades that are now grimy with coal smoke. The streets are busier now, filled with people heading to work, bicycles weaving through the foot traffic, occasional cars, much fewer than you'd expect for a city this size, gasoline being strictly rationed. The smell hits you strongly now, coal smoke, thick and pervasive, hanging in the morning air. Every building burns coal for heat, and the result is a haze that makes the air grey-brown, that gets in your throat and nose. You can taste it. Beneath the coal smoke are other smells. Horse manure from the carts that still deliver goods, the sour smell of uncollected garbage, cooking smells from breakfast, ersatz coffee and bread and something frying, though you can't identify what. You keep walking, deeper into the city, following the crowds. You need to get your bearings, find your way to the accommodation you've arranged, but first you want to understand the city, to see it, to let it become real to you. The shops are beginning to open. You pass a bakery, and there's already a queue forming outside. Housewives with shopping bags and ration cards, waiting for the shop to open so they can get their bread allocation. The queue is orderly, quiet, the women standing patiently, occasionally chatting, in low voices. You see one woman checking her ration card, calculating what she can get today. You turn a corner and you're on a larger street. Kurfürstendamm, you realise, one of the major boulevards. Before the war, this was a grand shopping street, fashionable and expensive. It still has that grandeur, but faded now, made shabby by wartime austerity. Many of the shops have simplified window displays. The luxury goods are mostly gone. Some windows are boarded up or covered with cross tape to protect against bomb blast. But the street still functions, still has a kind of life to it. People walk along the sidewalks, going about their business, the women mostly in dark coats and headscarves, the men in suits and hats, everyone dressed in muted colours, everyone moving with purpose. You see your first military uniforms, a group of Wehrmacht soldiers on leave, walking together, young men in field grey, talking and laughing. They look impossibly young, their faces unlined, their uniforms clean and pressed. They're on leave from the front, you realise, and they're enjoying themselves, free for a few days from whatever horror they've been part of. One of them catches your eye and nods, a casual greeting. You nod back, keeping your face neutral, and they move on. A newspaper boy is on the corner, selling papers from a stack. The headline is in large Gothic script, something about victories on the Eastern Front. You make yourself not read it too carefully, not wanting to know the specific lies and truths mixed together in the Nazi press. A man buys a paper, glances at it, tucks it under his arm without much expression. The news is controlled, propaganda-shaped, and everyone knows it even if they don't say so. You're getting hungry. The walk from the forest and the cold morning air have made you ravenous, and you realise you need to eat, need to understand how the food system works here. You look around and spot a small cafe, its windows steamed from inside, people visible inside sitting at small tables. You push open the door and enter. The warmth hits you first, blessed warmth after the cold morning. The cafe is crowded, mostly with working people grabbing quick breakfast before heading to their jobs. There's a counter where a tired-looking woman in her 40s takes orders, and small tables crammed close together. The air smells of coffee. Ersatz coffee, you remember. Not real coffee, but roasted grain or chicory or some other substitute, and bread and frying fat. You approach the counter. The woman glances at you, waiting. Guten Morgen, you say, your German careful, practiced. Ich möchte Frühstück, bitte. I would like breakfast, please. She rattles off the options in rapid Berlin-accented German. Bread with margarine, perhaps jam if you have the coupons, ersatz coffee, weak tea. There is porridge if you want it. There are eggs, but they require extra coupons. She says all this in a flat, business-like tone, not unfriendly but not warm either, just someone doing her job in the early morning. You order bread with margarine and coffee, handing over the small coins and the appropriate section of your ration card. She tears off the coupon section with practiced efficiency, gives you a numbered chit, and tells you to sit down. They'll bring it out. You find a small table near the wall, sitting down carefully, looking around. The other people in the cafe are mostly alone or in pairs, eating quickly, not lingering. A man in workman's clothes is reading a newspaper while shoveling porridge into his mouth. Two women at another table are talking in low voices, their heads close together. A uniformed policeman sits by the window drinking coffee and watching the street. Your food arrives, brought by a young girl, maybe 16, in a stained apron. The bread is dark, dense, not white, probably made with mixed grains to stretch the wheat ration. The margarine is thin, yellowish, spread sparsely. The coffee is in a small cup, and when you taste it, it's bitter and strange. Definitely not real coffee, but it's hot and that's what matters. You eat slowly, watching the people around you, learning the patterns. The way people eat efficiently, not wasting anything, wiping their plates with bread to get every bit. The way they pocket the napkins. Cloth napkins are precious, paper ones barely exist. The way they speak quietly, never raising their voices, as if loud conversation might attract the wrong kind of attention. When you finish, you bus your own dishes to a tray by the door. Everyone does this, it's expected, and you leave. Back out onto the street into the cold air that feels even colder after the warmth of the cafe. You walk more now, getting your bearings, starting to build a mental map of the city. You cross through the Tiergarten, the large park in the centre of Berlin. In peacetime, this would be a leafy, pleasant place. Now it's different. Parts of it have been turned to vegetable gardens, dig for victory allotments where people grow food to supplement their rations. You see a few people working in their plots, even this early in the day, tending cabbages and potatoes. Other parts of the park have been scarred by bomb damage. You see craters, filled in but still visible, the grass growing back in patchy ways. Trees have been cut down, either from bomb damage or to be used for fuel. The park is beautiful despite all this, or perhaps beautiful in a different way, a sadness to it. The early morning light filters through the remaining trees, making long shadows. A few people walk dogs, thin dogs, not as well fed as peacetime pets would be. An old man sits on a bench, feeding birds from a small bag of crumbs, and you wonder how he can spare the food. You emerge from the park on the other side and find yourself near the government district. Here the buildings are monumental, imperial-era architecture mixed with newer Nazi construction. The Reichstag building is ahead, its dome damaged from the fire in 1933, never fully repaired. Nearby are ministry buildings, massive and imposing, with flags and banners hanging from them, red banners with black swastikas in white circles, the Nazi flag hanging everywhere, inescapable. Soldiers stand guard at various checkpoints, and you see your first SS men, the black uniforms distinctive, the death's head insignia on their caps. They stand in pairs, watching people pass, occasionally stopping someone to check papers. You give them a wide berth, keeping to the far side of the street, not making eye contact. The streets here are wider, designed for pageantry and parades. You've seen photos of this area, film footage from Nazi rallies, and it's disorienting to see it in person, to be here in this space that you know from history books and documentaries. Unter den Linden, the famous boulevard, stretches ahead of you, lined with trees that are now mostly bare, their branches skeletal against the sky. The street is busy with military vehicles, staff cars, trucks. Ordinary civilians walk here too, but seem smaller, less significant, dwarfed by the architecture and the military presence. You turn away from the government district, not wanting to spend too much time in an area with so much security. You head toward Alexanderplatz, a major square and transport hub. The U-Bahn station there will let you move around the city more easily, and you want to see how the subway system functions. As you walk, you pass more shops, all of them with reduced inventory, windows that in peacetime would have been full of goods now showing sparse displays. A clothing shop has a few dresses on mannequins, the style severe and practical. A butcher shop has a queue outside, women waiting for the shop to have meat to sell. The schedule is irregular, dependent on deliveries, and you learn from snippets of conversation that the butcher got a delivery this morning, hence the queue. You see more signs of the ideology everywhere. Posters on walls showing idealized German workers and soldiers, slogans about sacrifice and victory, fundraising drives for the war effort. Wheels must roll for victory, one poster proclaims, showing a train and factory. Another shows a soldier and a worker shaking hands. We are the front and homeland united. The propaganda is relentless, visual and verbal, impossible to escape. You reach Alexanderplatz, and it's chaos. A massive open square surrounded by buildings, with tram lines crisscrossing it. People everywhere. The U-Bahn station entrances like dark mouths swallowing and disgorging crowds. There's a huge advertisement for something, you're not sure what, painted on the side of a building. There are soldiers here too, small groups moving through, and police, and ordinary civilians hurrying about their business. The square has been damaged. You can see where buildings have been hit by bombs, the facades, scarred, some windows boarded up. But life continues around the damage, people just navigating around it, barely seeming to notice. You descend into the U-Bahn station, following the crowds down the stairs. The stations are dimmed, not brightly lit like modern metros, and the tilework is grimy, stained by years of smoke and use. There are signs everywhere with instructions for air raids, arrows pointing to deeper shelter areas, warnings about what to do when the sirens sound. You need a ticket, and there's a window where a bored-looking man sells them. You ask for a single journey ticket, hand over coins, receive a small printed ticket. The system is simple enough. The trains run on electricity and they're frequent every few minutes. You wait on the platform with the others, the crowd silent or speaking in low murmurs. There's no pushing, no disorder. Everything is orderly, controlled, as if chaos would be an offence against the state itself. The train arrives with a screech and a rush of stale air. The cars are packed, and you squeeze in, pressed against other bodies. The smell is overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, sweat, coal smoke that clings to clothes, damp wool, the sour smell of breath, and too many people in too small a space. No one makes eye contact. Everyone stares at nothing, enduring the crowding. The train lurches forward, and you're carried through the darkness of the tunnels, the lights flickering occasionally. At each stop, people push out and new people push in, the crowd constantly changing composition but never getting any less dense. You ride for several stops, getting a feel for the system, watching the passengers, learning how people behave here. You emerge from the subway at a different station, in a working-class district of northeast Berlin. The buildings here are older, more cramped, the streets narrower. This is not the grand governmental Berlin or the fashionable shopping streets. This is where ordinary people live and work, and you want to see it, to understand the texture of daily life for the majority. The afternoon is well established now, the sun having reached its peak and begun its descent. The temperature has warmed slightly, though it's still cold, and the sky is that particular grey-white that seems characteristic of Berlin in this era. Not exactly overcast, but not clear either, the pollution and coal smoke creating a perpetual haze. You walk through the neighbourhood, observing. The apartment buildings are 5 and 6 stories, built in the 1880s and 1890s, solid brick structures with courtyards inside. The facades are decorated with ornamental details, carved stone, decorative balconies, but everything is grimy, darkened by decades of coal smoke. Laundry hangs from some windows despite the cold, shirts and bedsheets flapping in the breeze, and you realise that with so little fuel for heating water, washing clothes is a major undertaking, and people dry them whenever they can. Children are playing in the street, a group of boys kicking a ball made of tied rags, girls jumping rope and chanting rhymes in sing-song Berlin accents. They're wearing worn clothes, hand-me-downs and mended items, but they're playing with the timeless energy of children everywhere. A woman leans out of a second-floor window and shouts at them to be careful, to stay close to the building, and they ignore her with the casual disobedience of kids who've heard the warning 1,000 times. You pass a corner shop and there's a notice board outside with official announcements. You stop to read them, partly out of curiosity and partly because doing so seems like something an ordinary person would do, and you want to blend in. The notices are printed on cheap paper, some of them typed, some handwritten. There are announcements about ration distribution times, about air raid drill schedules, about contributions to the Winter Relief Fund, about how to report suspicious persons. There's a notice recruiting women for factory work, offering wages and childcare assistance. Another notice warns about the penalties for black market activity: imprisonment, confiscation of goods, in severe cases execution. One notice makes your blood run cold. A list of names, Jewish names, announcing their deportation to the east for resettlement. The notice is matter-of-fact, bureaucratic, giving dates and assembly points. You stare at it, feeling sick. These are death sentences, written in bland administrative language, posted on a public board for anyone to see. Some of the names have addresses listed, apartments in this very neighbourhood. You force yourself to move on, to not stand there staring. An old man is sitting on a stoop nearby smoking a pipe, and he's watching you. You nod to him, and he nods back, his face weathered and expressionless. You wonder what he thinks, what he knows, what he's seen. You wonder if he knew the people whose names are on that list. You wonder if he cares. You turn down a side street and nearly collide with a young woman coming around the corner. She gasps, stepping back, and you see she's wearing a yellow star on her coat. The 6-pointed Star of David with Jude. written in the centre. She's perhaps 20, thin, her face pale and frightened. For a moment your eyes meet, and you see the terror there, the knowledge of what's coming or maybe what's already happening. She drops her gaze immediately, steps around you with her head down, hurries away. You stand frozen for a moment watching her go. This woman who is being hunted by the state, who is walking the streets of her home city as a marked person, as someone outside the law, outside humanity in the eyes of the regime. You cannot help her. You cannot save her. You can only witness, and even that feels like a violation, like you're complicit just by being here, by not doing something, even though doing something would accomplish nothing except adding yourself to the list of victims. You walk on, your heart pounding, your throat tight. You need to remember why you're here, need to focus on observation, on learning, on seeing this period as it really was, not as it's sanitized in history books. This is the reality. Ordinary streets where ordinary people go about their business while atrocities happen in plain sight. The afternoon wears on, and you find yourself in a market area. This isn't the grand market halls of central Berlin, but a smaller neighbourhood market. Vendors with carts and small stalls selling what they can. The selection is depressing. Potatoes, cabbages, turnips, onions, some winter squash. The vegetables are muddy, some of them bruised or starting to rot, but people are buying them because it's what's available. A vegetable seller is arguing with a customer over the price, both of them red-faced, and you hear the customer saying she doesn't have enough coupons, she needs to feed her children, can't he make an exception? He refuses, hard-voiced, says he has rules to follow, he'll be shut down if he's caught selling without coupons. She walks away empty-handed, her face set and angry. Another stall sells preserved goods, jars of pickled vegetables, jams with very little sugar, bottled fruits from last summer. These are expensive even with coupons, and most people just look and move on. A few buy small jars, luxuries or treats to supplement the bland rations. There's a fish seller with a cart and the smell is overwhelming. Strong, not quite rotten but not fresh either. He's selling smoked fish, herrings, and people are buying despite the smell because protein is protein and meat is increasingly hard to get. You watch as a housewife buys 2 herrings, hands over coins and coupons, wraps them in newspaper, puts them in her shopping bag. The transaction is efficient, practiced, both buyer and seller knowing their roles in this economy of scarcity. You're starting to understand the rhythm of life here. The constant calculations of rations and coupons, the standing in queues, the making do with less, the stretching of food and resources, the whole population engaged in a kind of siege mentality, even though the bombs haven't yet destroyed the city. This is what total war looks like on the home front. Not starvation yet, but a grinding, exhausting scarcity, a constant low-level stress about whether there will be enough. As you're watching the market, you hear the sound of marching, rhythmic and growing louder. You turn and see a column of people marching up the street. It's a Hitler Youth unit, boys in their brown shirts and black shorts, carrying banners, marching in formation. They're singing, one of the Nazi songs, their young voices loud and enthusiastic. At the front of the column, adult leaders in uniform march with them, keeping order. The people in the market stop what they're doing and watch. Some of them raise their arms in the Hitler salute as the column passes. You do the same, raising your arm, your stomach churning at the gesture but knowing you have no choice. The boys march past, some of them barely teenagers, their faces serious and proud, believing in the ideology they've been raised in, believing they're the future of the Reich. They're children, you think. They're just children, but they're children who've been taught to glorify war and to hate. And many of them will be dead in a few years, killed on some Eastern Front battlefield or in the ruins of Berlin when the war comes home. When they've passed, people lower their arms and go back to their business, and you do the same, feeling shaken. The casual nature of it, the way people just accept it as normal, is somehow worse than overt violence would be. This is the banality of evil, you think, remembering Hannah Arendt's phrase. This is what it looks like. Ordinary people doing ordinary things while an entire society has organised itself around monstrous principles. You need to see more, need to understand as much as you can in the time you have. You decide to make your way to one of the places where the regime's ideology is most visible, a factory where forced labourers work alongside German civilians. You've learned that there are several such factories in Berlin's industrial districts, and you want to see one, want to witness this aspect of the war economy. You take the U-Bahn again, heading east to the industrial areas. The further you go from the centre, the more working class the neighbourhoods become, the buildings more utilitarian, the streets more cluttered with industrial equipment and rail sidings. You emerge from the subway into an area dominated by factory buildings, massive brick structures with rows of windows, some of them belching smoke from tall chimneys. You walk toward one of the larger complexes, a metalworks factory that you can identify by the sound of hammering and machinery even from the street. There's a main gate with guards, but there are also places along the fence where you can see into the factory yard. You find such a spot partially concealed by a parked truck and you watch. The yard is crowded with activity. Workers move between buildings, some of them pushing carts loaded with materials. You can see the differences between them immediately. The German workers in regular work clothes moving freely, talking to each other, and the forced labourers, who are marked in various ways. Some wear striped uniforms, concentration camp prisoners brought here to work in the factory. Others wear civilian clothes but with patches sewn on, OST for Eastern workers, or P for Poles. These people move differently, more cautiously, and they're supervised by guards, men in uniforms who watch them constantly. You watch as a group of prisoners in stripes is marched across the yard, heading toward one of the factory buildings. They walk in formation, and they're thin, skeletal thin, their clothes hanging off them. One of them stumbles, and a guard shouts, and the man straightens and keeps walking. They disappear into the building and you hear the machines start up inside, the sounds of industrial production. This is what the war economy runs on, you realise. Slave labour. Millions of people worked to death in German factories and mines and farms, their labour extracted until they couldn't work anymore and then they were disposed of. And it's all happening in plain sight, in the middle of cities, where ordinary Germans work alongside the slaves, where everyone can see but where no one acknowledges what's happening. You watch for a long time, seeing the patterns. The German workers take breaks, leave the buildings to smoke or talk. The forced labourers don't get breaks, or if they do, they're much shorter and supervised. Food is brought in, you see carts wheeled into the complex, and you know that the Germans will eat first and eat better, while the forced labourers get whatever's left, usually watery soup and stale bread. A guard notices you watching, and you feel a spike of fear. He walks toward the fence, and you prepare to leave quickly, but he just stares at you for a moment and then turns away, apparently satisfied that you're just a curious passerby, not a threat. You take the hint and move on, not wanting to attract more attention. You walk away from the factory, heading back toward more residential areas, and the afternoon is sliding toward evening now. The light is changing, becoming more golden, the sun lowering toward the horizon. The temperature is dropping again, and you pull your coat tighter. You find yourself on a main street as the workday is ending, and suddenly the streets are full of people, workers leaving their shifts, students leaving schools, everyone heading home or to whatever evening activities they have planned. The tram stops are packed, people waiting for crowded trams to take them home. Bicyclists weave through the pedestrians, ringing their bells. There's a flow and energy to it, the city pulsing with movement. You decide to do something you've been curious about since you arrived. You're going to try to attend a Nazi rally. You know from your research that the regime constantly organised public events, rallies, marches, assemblies, and that attendance was often mandatory or at least heavily encouraged for workers. You've heard that there's a rally this evening at a local party hall, something to boost morale and encourage contributions to the war effort. You make your way to the district party headquarters, a squat building with Nazi flags hanging from it, and sure enough there's a crowd gathering outside. Most of them look like workers, people who've come directly from their jobs still in their work clothes. There are party officials at the door, men in brown SA uniforms ushering people inside. You join the queue, trying to look like you belong, and when you reach the door, one of the officials glances at you, nods, and waves you through. No one checks your papers, no one asks who you are. They want the crowd to be big, and they're not going to turn anyone away who shows up voluntarily. Inside, the hall is large, utilitarian, with rows of wooden benches facing a stage. The walls are decorated with banners, swastikas, Nazi slogans, portraits of Hitler. The room is already half full, and more people are streaming in. You find a seat toward the back, not wanting to be too conspicuous, and you watch as the hall fills. The people around you are mostly quiet, talking in low voices if they talk at all. They look tired, worn down by work and worry. This isn't an enthusiastic crowd. These are people who are here because they're supposed to be here. because not showing up would be noticed, because participation in these events is part of the expected performance of loyalty to the regime. The hall fills almost completely, several hundred people packed onto the benches, and then the officials close the doors and the lights dim slightly. Music plays from speakers, a recorded military march, brassy and bombastic. People shift on the hard benches waiting. Then a man strides onto the stage and the crowd rises to its feet. You stand with them, raising your arm in the Hitler salute as everyone else does. Sieg Heil, they shout 3 times, the words echoing in the hall. You move your mouth, miming the words without sound, and then everyone sits down again. The man on the stage is a local party official, you gather, someone of middling importance. He's in his 40s, wearing a brown party uniform with various insignia you don't fully understand. He begins to speak, and his voice is loud, amplified by the room's acoustics, and he speaks in the rhetorical style you've heard in recordings of Hitler's speeches, the rising passion, the dramatic pauses, the appeals to emotion. He talks about the war, about the heroic struggles of German soldiers, about the necessity of sacrifice on the home front. He talks about how every German must do their part, must give everything to ensure victory. He rails against the enemies of the Reich, the Jews, the Bolsheviks, the plutocrats of the West. He describes these enemies in the most vile terms, accusing them of conspiracy and evil, working them into a target for the crowd's fear and anger. The crowd responds in ways that are clearly practiced. At certain points, they shout slogans in unison. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. One people, one empire, one leader. At other points they applaud. The official works the room, building to crescendos and then pulling back, and you can see the technique, can see how this kind of rhetorical manipulation works on a crowd. But you can also see that the enthusiasm is mostly performative. People shout because everyone else is shouting, but their faces are tired, their eyes are glazed. This isn't the wild enthusiasm of the early Nazi rallies in the 1930s. This is a population going through the motions, exhausted by years of war, playing their part in the required theatre of regime loyalty, because the alternative is dangerous. The official introduces a special guest, a wounded soldier, back from the front, who will tell them about the heroic battles in the East. A young man in Wehrmacht uniform limps onto the stage, his left arm in a sling, a bandage visible beneath his cap. He looks like he'd rather be anywhere else, but he tells his story. The fighting in Russia, the cold, the bravery of his comrades, the necessity of defeating the Bolshevik enemy. He describes battles in terms that glorify and simplify them, turning horror into heroism. The crowd applauds at the appropriate moments. Then comes the pitch. The regime is organising a new drive to collect winter clothing for soldiers at the front. Everyone must contribute. The official describes what's needed. Warm coats, wool socks, scarves, gloves. Party workers will come to collect in the next few days, and everyone is expected to donate. There's a suggestion that those who don't donate will be noted, their lack of patriotism remembered. It's not quite a threat, but it's close. The rally continues for nearly 2 hours. More speeches, more songs, more exhortations. By the end, you're exhausted just from sitting and pretending to pay attention, and you can see that everyone else is too. When it finally ends, people rise, give one more Sieg Heil, and then file out quickly, eager to get home. You leave with the crowd, stepping out into the darkness. The sun has set while you were inside, and the blackout is in effect. The streets are dark, illuminated only by occasional dim blue lights, and by the lights of vehicles, which are fitted with hooded headlights that direct their beams downward. People navigate by memory and familiarity, and you follow the crowd, letting them guide you toward the nearest tram stop. The darkness is profound, deeper than any night you've experienced in the modern world. Without streetlights, without lit windows, without the background glow of a modern city, the darkness is nearly absolute. You can see stars above, more stars than you've ever seen from a city, but they're dimmed by the coal smoke haze. The only sounds are footsteps, quiet voices, the distant rumble of vehicles. You make your way to the accommodation you've arranged, ready for food and rest after this long, exhausting, disturbing day. But first, you need to eat, and you're curious about what an evening meal in Berlin consists of, so you look for a place that's open. You find a small Gaststätte, a pub restaurant, its windows covered with blackout curtains, but a dim blue light above the door indicating it's open. You push through the heavy curtain into the interior, and the warmth and light hit you after the cold darkness outside. The place is crowded, full of people who've come for their evening meal, and the air is thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of beer, and cooking food. You find a small table in the corner, and a waiter, an older man, too old for military service, comes over with a menu card. The menu is short, limited by rationing, and written in hand on a board. Potato soup, boiled potatoes with herring, bread, cabbage salad, and beer or a Satz coffee. You order the soup and beer, hand over the necessary ration coupons and coins, and settle in to watch the room. The clientele is mixed. Working men in their caps and work jackets, some women in groups, a few couples. There's a low murmur of conversation, people talking over their meals and drinks, and it feels almost normal, almost like a regular neighbourhood pub in any era, except for the undercurrents. People speak quietly, cautiously. Laughter is subdued. There's a wariness in the air, a sense that even here, even in this relatively private space, people are careful about what they say. At a nearby table, two men are discussing work, something about production quotas at the factory where they work, how the targets keep increasing but the materials keep getting scarcer. They complain, but in vague terms, never criticising the regime directly, just grousing about the impossible demands being made on them. Another table has three women, and you catch fragments of their conversation. They're talking about children, about the difficulties of feeding them on the rations, about how one of them managed to get extra milk from a farmer by trading some of her clothing coupons. This quiet black market talk is normal. Everyone does it. Everyone knows about it. But it's spoken of carefully, never loudly enough to be overheard by the wrong person. Your soup arrives, and it's thin, watery, with chunks of potato and some unidentifiable vegetable, maybe turnip. There's a faint taste of fat, probably animal fat, but not much. You eat it with the dark bread that comes with it, and it's filling in a basic way, though not satisfying. The beer is weak, watered down, but it's real beer, and that's something. You drink it slowly, savouring the slight bitterness, the small comfort of it. The waiter comes by to collect your empty bowl and asks if you want anything else. You order another beer, wanting to sit here a bit longer, to watch and listen. He brings it, and you nurse it, listening to the conversations around you, learning the texture of life in this city. A man at a table nearby is reading a newspaper, and you can see the headline from where you sit. Something about victories in North Africa, about Rommel's successes. The man reads with a sceptical expression, and when his companion says something, he just shrugs, folds the paper, puts it aside. They don't believe it, or they half believe it, or they believe it but know better than to express certainty about anything. The pub gradually empties as the evening wears on. People finish their meals and drinks and head home, needing to navigate the dark streets before it gets too late. You decide to leave as well, settling your bill and stepping back out into the darkness. The night is fully established now, and it's colder than before. Your breath makes clouds, visible even in the darkness. The streets are nearly empty, most people having retreated to their homes, and the silence is eerie. You hear your own footsteps echoing off the building facades and occasional sounds from behind windows. A baby crying, muffled voices, the sound of a radio playing. You navigate by memory and by the occasional dim blue light marking intersections. The darkness is absolute in places, and you find yourself walking with your hand touching the building walls to guide you, feeling your way like a blind person. This is what nighttime meant for most of human history, you realise. This profound darkness, this inability to see, this vulnerability and uncertainty. Only in the last century and a half have humans lit the night, and even now, in wartime, they've given that up, returned to the ancient darkness for safety from bombers. You're heading toward the address where you've arranged accommodation, a room in an apartment owned by a widow who rents out space to supplement her pension. You find the building, a 5-story apartment block in a working-class neighbourhood, and you let yourself into the dark entrance hall. There's no light at all inside, and you have to feel your way to the stairs, climb them slowly and carefully, counting the floors. On the 3rd floor you find the right door, knock quietly. The door opens, and there's the landlady, Frau Schmidt, a woman in her 60s with grey hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a threadbare dress and a wool shawl. She looks you over with sharp eyes, making sure you are who you're supposed to be, and then she steps back to let you in. "Your room is this way," she says in German, her voice low, and she leads you down a dark hallway to a small room at the back of the apartment. She opens the door, and you see a narrow room with a single bed, a small table, a chair, a wardrobe. There's a window with blackout curtains already drawn. A candle burns on the table, providing minimal light. "Toilet is down the hall, shared," she says. "Water for washing in the morning. Don't use much. We're limited. Breakfast is at 7, included in your rent. You have your ration cards?" You show her the cards, and she nods. "Good. I'll take the coupons for the meals. Any questions?" You ask about the air raids, about what to do when the sirens sound. She gives you a look that suggests this is obvious. "Down to the cellar through the courtyard door. We all go down. Don't be slow about it. The wardens check." She pauses. "They come most nights lately, the English. Sometimes it's not our district, but you can't know. Always go down." She leaves you then, closing the door behind her, and you're alone in this small, cold room, lit by a single candle. You sit on the bed. It's firm, the mattress thin, but it's clean, the sheets rough but freshly washed. You look around the room, taking in the details. There's a picture on the wall, a photograph of a young man in Wehrmacht uniform, someone's son or husband, maybe the landlady's. There's a small crucifix on the wall above the bed, a sign of residual Christianity in a regime that's hostile to faith. You blow out the candle to conserve it, and the room plunges into darkness. You lie back on the bed, fully clothed, too tired to undress, and you stare into the darkness, processing everything you've seen today. The horror of it sits on your chest like a weight. The casual cruelty, the bureaucratic murder, the ordinary people going about their lives while atrocity happens around them, and with them, and by them. The fear that permeates everything, the constant surveillance, the knowledge that one wrong word could destroy you. The children in their Hitler Youth uniforms, marching and singing songs about war. The forced labourers working themselves to death in factories while German workers eat lunch nearby. The yellow stars on coats, the names on the deportation lists, and through it all, the strange normalcy. People eating meals, buying groceries, going to work, complaining about rationing, telling jokes, falling in love, raising children. Life going on even in hell. That's what disturbs you most, perhaps. Not the overt violence, though that's terrible enough, but the way that violence coexists with ordinary life, the way people can be complicit in monstrous systems while still being human in small ways. You don't know how long you lie there in the darkness, your thoughts cycling through what you've witnessed. Then, cutting through the silence, comes the sound you've been half expecting, half dreading all day, the air raid sirens. They start low and then rise to a wailing crescendo, a sound designed to induce panic, to drive people to shelter. The sound is everywhere, multiple sirens across the city creating a chorus of warning. You hear movement immediately, doors opening, voices calling out, footsteps in the hallway and on the stairs. You get up, fumble in the darkness for the door, open it. Frau Schmidt is in the hallway with a flashlight that's been dimmed with red paper. "Come," she says urgently, "everyone to the cellar." You follow her and the other tenants down the stairs, stumbling in the darkness, everyone hurrying. Out into the courtyard, the stars visible overhead, more sirens wailing from every direction, and then down a set of stone steps into the cellar. The cellar is cold and damp with a low ceiling supported by brick pillars. There are benches along the walls, and a dim electric light bulb hanging from the ceiling provides minimal illumination. Already there are 20 or 30 people here, tenants from this building and maybe neighbouring ones all crowded into this underground space. Children are crying, held by their mothers. Older people sit on the benches, faces grim. A few men stand, listening to the world above. Everyone is silent now, the sirens having stopped, leaving an eerie quiet. You can hear your own breathing, the breathing of others, the occasional whimper from a child. Then, in the distance, you hear it. The drone of airplane engines high above, multiple aircraft, the sound rising and falling as they pass overhead. Then the anti-aircraft guns start firing, a hammering thud, thud, thud that you feel in your chest as much as here. The guns are all over the city, on rooftops and in parks, firing up at the bombers, and the sound is deafening even underground. You hear the whistle of shells going up, and then, much higher, the distant crump of explosions as they detonate near the bombers. The people in the cellar are completely still, everyone listening, waiting. You see fear on their faces, especially on the faces of the mothers holding children. An old man is praying quietly, his lips moving, his hands clasped. A young woman sits with her eyes closed, tears running down her face. Then you hear the first bomb fall, somewhere in the distance, a whistle that starts high and descends in pitch, and then an explosion, a massive crump that you feel through the earth even here. The light bulb sways. Dust falls from the ceiling. Someone cries out, then stifles it. More bombs fall, some distant, some closer. Each one is preceded by that terrible whistling sound, seconds of knowing it's coming, waiting for the explosion, not knowing if this one will be the one that hits your building. The explosions are irregular, scattered, and you realise this isn't a targeted raid on this neighbourhood specifically. The bombers are dropping their loads across a wide area, hitting what they hit, and it's pure chance whether you live or die. The raid goes on for what feels like hours, but is probably 20 or 30 minutes. The anti-aircraft fire is constant, the explosions irregular but frequent. You hear a massive explosion relatively close, maybe a few streets away, and the whole cellar shakes, the light going out for a moment and then flickering back on. Someone screams. A child is wailing. Frau Schmidt is sitting on a bench nearby and she's holding a rosary, her lips moving in prayer, but her face is calm, resigned. She's been through this before, many times, and she's accepted the randomness of it, the fact that you live or die by pure chance and there's nothing you can do about it. Then the bombs stop falling. The anti-aircraft fire continues for a few more minutes and then tapers off. The drone of the airplane engines fades as the bombers turn away, heading back to England. The silence that follows is profound, broken only by the crying of children and the ragged breathing of frightened people. No one moves immediately. You wait, listening for the all-clear siren, which eventually sounds, a steady tone, very different from the wailing of the warning siren. People begin to stir, to stand, to gather their children and belongings. "Is everyone here?" someone calls out, and there's a murmured response as people check on each other, confirm that everyone from the building made it to the shelter. An air raid warden comes down the steps, a man in a steel helmet and armband, and does a count, makes notes on a clipboard. "You can go up," he says. "Check your apartments for damage. If there's damage, report to the district office in the morning. If anyone is hurt, there's an aid station 2 streets over." People file out of the cellar, climbing the stairs slowly, exhausted. You emerge into the courtyard, and the air smells of smoke and dust. You look up and see an orange glow in the sky to the east. Something is burning over there, probably several somethings. Fires from the bombs. You go back to your room, and it's untouched, though there's dust everywhere from the shaking. You check the window, looking out past the blackout curtain, and you can see the glow of fires in the distance, smoke rising to block out the stars. You hear fire engine bells, sirens, shouting. This is what it's like, you think. This is what it means to live in a city at war, where death can fall from the sky any night, where there's no real protection, just the thin hope that the bombs will hit someone else's neighbourhood instead of yours. You try to sleep, lying on the bed fully clothed, but sleep is difficult. Every sound makes you tense, waiting for the sirens to start again. You doze fitfully, and in the early hours of the morning the sirens do sound again, and everyone stumbles down to the cellar again, and you wait through another raid, this one shorter, and then the all-clear sounds, and you go back to your room again. When dawn finally comes, you've barely slept. You can hear the city stirring, people getting up to go to work despite the interrupted night, because work continues, life continues, even after the raids. You hear Frau Schmidt in the hallway, calling that breakfast will be ready in half an hour. You get up, wash your face in the small basin of cold water that's been left for you, try to make yourself presentable. You're exhausted, rattled by the night's terror, and you have a new understanding of what the people of this city endure night after night, month after month, and what worse horrors are still to come in the years ahead. You join Frau Schmidt and 2 other lodgers at the small kitchen table for breakfast. The meal is meagre: dark bread, a thin scraping of margarine, ersatz coffee that tastes of burnt grain. No one speaks much. The exhaustion of the interrupted night sits heavily on all of you, and there's nothing to say that hasn't been said 100 times before. This is normal now. This is life. After breakfast, you leave the apartment, stepping out into the morning light. The air is cold and sharp, and it smells strongly of smoke. Not just the usual coal smoke, but the acrid smell of burning buildings, of destruction. You walk toward where you saw the fires last night, curious and horrified in equal measure, needing to see what the bombs did. 2 streets over, you find it. A building that took a direct hit reduced to a pile of rubble. The structure has collapsed in on itself, brick and timber and broken furniture spilling into the street. The neighbouring buildings are damaged too, their facades cracked, windows blown out, roofs partially caved in. Rescue workers are already there, civilians and civil defence personnel digging through the rubble, looking for survivors or bodies. You watch as they pull out a child's doll covered in dust and set it aside with other salvaged items that mean nothing now. A woman stands nearby, just standing and staring at the rubble, and you realise this must have been her home, her life, now reduced to broken stone and memories. She doesn't cry, doesn't speak, just stands there with a blank, shocked expression. No one tries to comfort her. There's no comfort to be had. You move on, walking through the neighbourhood, seeing the other damage from last night's raid. Some buildings have minor damage, broken windows, cracked walls, roof tiles blown off. Others have gaping holes where bombs penetrated, exposing the interior rooms to the sky. You see a bedroom, the wallpaper visible, a bed still made, the wall beside it simply gone. It's obscene, this exposure of private space to public view. Workers are already clearing the streets, shoveling debris, making paths for traffic. Life must go on. Production must continue. People must get to work. The machinery of the war economy doesn't stop for something as trivial as a few hundred dead civilians and some destroyed buildings. You make your way toward the centre of the city, taking the U-Bahn again. The trains are running, though service is delayed and disrupted. At one station, part of the ceiling has collapsed and you have to detour around it, following temporary barriers and signs. On the train, people are silent, hollow-eyed, the exhaustion and fear visible on every face. You emerge at Alexanderplatz and find it's been hit too. One of the buildings around the square has been destroyed, and others are burning still, fire crews pouring water on the flames from hoses connected to hydrants. The water pressure seems weak, and the fires are not really being controlled, just being kept from spreading to adjacent buildings. You watch for a while, seeing how the city copes with this recurring disaster. There's an efficiency to it, a grim competence. They've done this before, they'll do it again, and everyone knows their role. Rubble is cleared, fires are fought, bodies are collected, and within hours the square is functioning again, trams running, people going about their business, stepping around the destruction as if it's normal. You decide to visit some of the landmarks you haven't seen yet, knowing your time here is limited, wanting to see as much as you can even though everything you see weighs on you like a stone. You walk to the Reichstag, the imposing government building. It's heavily guarded, soldiers and SS men everywhere, and you can't get close, but you can see it from a distance, see the damaged dome, the flags and banners. This is the seat of the regime's power, such as it is. The real power is more diffuse, held by Hitler and his inner circle, by the SS and the party, by the competing bureaucracies that make up the Nazi state. You walk along Unter den Linden, the Grand Boulevard, seeing the embassies and government buildings, the museums and institutions. Many of them have been repurposed for the war effort or stand empty, their peacetime functions suspended. You pass the Hotel Adlon, the most famous hotel in Berlin, and through the windows you can see Nazi officials, military officers, the elite of the regime dining and drinking as if there's no war, as if the bombs aren't falling, as if the whole structure isn't already beginning to crack. You spend the late morning walking through different neighbourhoods, seeing the variety of the city. The wealthy areas in the west, where the villas and elegant apartment buildings still stand mostly undamaged, where the people are better dressed and seem less worn down. The working class areas in the north and east, where the damage is worse and the exhaustion is more visible. The industrial zones with their factories and smokestacks, where the machinery of war grinds on endlessly. At midday, you find a small beer garden, one of the few still operating, and you sit at a table outside despite the cold. The garden is nearly empty, just a few other people sitting at scattered tables, and you order a beer and some bread and sausage, handing over your coupons. The sausage is mostly bread and mystery meat, held together with fat and spices, but it's protein, and that's what matters. You sit and drink your beer slowly, watching the few other patrons. An old man at another table is reading a book, his beer forgotten beside him, lost in whatever world the book provides, escapism from the nightmare of the real world. 2 women at another table talk quietly, their heads close together, and you wonder what they're discussing. whether it's the mundane concerns of daily life or something more dangerous, the kind of conversation that could get them arrested if overheard. The afternoon passes, and you realise that your time here is running out. You've seen what you came to see, witnessed what you needed to witness, and now you need to leave. To stay longer would only mean more exposure to the regime's machinery, more chances for something to go wrong, for your papers to be questioned too closely, for some inconsistency in your cover story to be noticed. You make your way slowly westward, toward the Grunewald forest, toward the place where you arrived, where the device is hidden. You take the U-Bahn part of the way, and then walk the rest, retracing the route you took when you first entered the city yesterday morning, though it feels like much longer ago. The afternoon light is grey and weak, the sun obscured by the perpetual haze. As you walk through the outer districts, you see more of the city's daily life. Children playing in bombed-out lots, using the rubble as a playground. Women hanging laundry despite the cold. Men repairing roofs and walls, trying to keep their homes functional. Queues at shops for the evening's food distribution. You reach the edge of the forest and keep walking, entering the trees, the city sounds fading behind you. The forest is quiet, cold, the bare branches of the deciduous trees stark against the sky. You walk deeper in, navigating by memory and landmarks, looking for the place where you buried the device. There, the 3 birch trees, the moss-covered boulder. You approach the oak tree with the split trunk, the exposed roots. You kneel and begin digging with your hands, scraping away the earth and leaves. Your fingers are cold and clumsy, and the dirt gets under your nails, but you keep digging until you feel the cloth-wrapped bundle. You pull it out, brush off the dirt, unwrap it carefully. The device is intact, unmarked by its burial. You stand, holding it, and you look back toward the city, though you can't see it from here, just the forest and the grey sky. You think about what you've seen, what you've experienced, the horror and the banality, the cruelty and the ordinary humanity, the way people can be both victims and perpetrators, the way a society can organise itself around evil while still containing moments of kindness and normalcy. You think about the people you saw, the woman with the yellow star, terrified and hurrying, the forced labourers in their striped uniforms worked to death, the children marching in Hitler Youth formations, the families huddled in bomb shelters, the old woman praying in the cellar, the workers complaining carefully about rations, the soldier telling his sanitised war stories at the rally. You think about Frau Schmidt, the landlady, who accepted you without question, who prays her rosary during air raids, who lost someone, a son, a husband, to the war, whose photograph hangs on the wall of the room you slept in. She's a product of this society, complicit in its crimes by her silence and compliance, but she's also a human being trying to survive in impossible circumstances. What would you do in her place? What would anyone do? These are questions without answers, or with too many answers, and you're exhausted from thinking about them, from the emotional and moral weight of being here. You take a breath, the cold forest air sharp in your lungs. You prepare the device for activation, your fingers shaking slightly, whether from cold or emotion you're not sure. You think about the modern world you're about to return to, with all its problems and complexities, and you realise that despite everything, it's a world that's learned, something from this period that's built structures, however imperfect, to try to prevent this from happening again. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Geneva Conventions, the international tribunals, the constant effort to remember and to learn and to never again. It's not enough, it's never enough, but it's something. You activate the device. There's that same sensation as before, the world beginning to shift, reality becoming uncertain. The forest around you blurs and distorts, the trees seeming to bend, the light changing. You feel the pull, the sense of falling without falling, of being drawn forward through time, through the decades, through the years that will bring the end of this war and the revelation of its full horrors, through the post-war years and the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall, through your grandparents' lives and your parents' lives, forward and forward until you reach your own time. The sensation stops, reality solidifies, you're standing in your room, the device in your hand, and everything is normal again, familiar, safe. You look around, almost disbelieving. Your laptop is on the desk, exactly where you left it. The lights are on, the electric hum of modern life audible. Through the window you can see streetlights, car headlights, the ordinary illuminated night of the 21st century. You can hear traffic, the distant sound of a television from a neighbouring apartment, someone's music playing. You set down the device and sit on your bed, and your hands are shaking. You're still wearing the clothes from 1940s Berlin, the worn wool coat and the heavy shoes, and they smell of coal smoke and dampness and the indescribable smell of that other time. You stand and begin to undress, peeling off the layers of historical clothing, and it feels like shedding a weight, like removing armour. You drop the clothes in a pile and stand in your underwear, and your own body feels strange to you, as if you've been gone much longer than you have. You go to the bathroom and turn on the shower, and the miracle of hot water on demand, of clean water that flows without rationing or restriction, almost makes you cry. You step under the spray and let it wash away the grime and smoke and exhaustion of Berlin. The water is hot, abundant, perfect, and it's a luxury beyond measure, something the people you've just left would consider almost unimaginable. You wash thoroughly, using soap that smells clean and modern, shampooing your hair, scrubbing away every trace of that other time. You stay in the shower for a long time, longer than you need to, just standing under the hot water, feeling it restore you. When you finally get out, you dry yourself with a soft towel and put on modern clothes, soft cotton, elastic waistbands, fabrics that are clean and bright and comfortable in ways that the clothes of 1940s Berlin never were. You look at yourself in the mirror and you look like yourself again, a person of the 21st century, but you feel changed, marked by what you've seen. You go to the kitchen and make coffee, real coffee, and the smell of it is glorious, and the taste is rich and full, and everything that Ersatz coffee was not. You make yourself food, simple food, a sandwich, some fruit, and you eat it slowly, savouring every bite, aware of how much you're taking for granted, how much abundance surrounds you. You sit on your couch with your coffee, and you turn on your television, and the images flicker across the screen, news and entertainment and advertisements, the constant flow of information and media that is the background noise of modern life. You think about the radio in 1940s Berlin, the state-controlled broadcasts, the propaganda, the lack of any other perspective. You think about the internet on your laptop, the access to any information you want, the ability to learn about anything, to see any perspective, to communicate with anyone anywhere. You think about the freedom you have, the safety, the rule of law, the protection of rights, the assumption that you won't be arrested for what you think or say or believe. You think about how all of this was built on the ruins of that world you just visited, built by people who saw what happened and said never again, and meant it, who created structures and institutions and laws to try to prevent such horrors from recurring. And you think about how fragile it all is, how easily it could be lost, how every generation has to choose whether to protect these freedoms or let them slip away, how vigilance is the eternal price. You sit for a long time, processing what you've experienced, trying to make sense of it, knowing that it will take days or weeks or maybe forever to fully process what you've seen. The evil and the banality, the horror and the ordinary humanity, the complexity of a society at war, in the grip of totalitarianism, complicit in genocide, and yet still containing individual people who are neither monsters nor heroes, but just humans trying to survive. History is not simple, you realise. It's not a matter of good and evil clearly delineated. It's complicated and messy and full of difficult truths and uncomfortable questions. But that complexity makes it more important, not less, to remember, to witness, to learn. You finish your coffee and set down the cup. You're back. You're safe. You're home. And you have a responsibility now, having seen what you've seen, to never forget, to bear witness, to remember the people you saw and the world they lived in, and the choices they made or failed to make. And with that, your journey back in time is over. We hope you enjoyed your visit to 1940s Berlin and learned a thing or two about what life was really like. If you'd like to travel to another time and place, we hope you'll return to our channel for more journeys through history. The remainder of this video will be the calm, relaxing sound of a crackling fire if you want to. Drift off to sleep or simply ponder your journey. Thanks again for tuning in with Time Travelling History, and we wish you a peaceful night.